My name is Megan White. I'm 37, meticulous to a fault, and perpetually exhausted from being the one everyone relies on. Growing up, I learned to carry other people's crises like a backpack that never emptied. If something broke, emotionally, financially, physically, I fixed it. I calculated every move because I was taught that being useful was more important than being seen. 2 weeks ago, my parents celebrated 50 years of marriage, 50 years of sacrifices, tiny victories, and unspoken compromises. I wanted them to have a real gift, a place untouched by the weight of old bills or hand-me-down furniture. I found a little blue house above the water, $425,000, a crooked little roof, white deck, 2 palm trees in front, windows that sang when the wind came from the bay. I stocked the fridge, set up utilities, left a note in the silverware drawer for late mornings and loud laughter. "Love tea," I wrote. I didn't tell anyone else, not Emma, not her husband, not even her children. It was meant to be a private celebration, a moment for my parents to breathe. The morning I arrived, the sky was a perfect, impossible blue. I parked in the driveway, cake in hand, and froze. There was already an SUV there. The front door stood wide open, a screen banging in the wind. Something was wrong. Inside, the kitchen looked like a storm had passed. My mother clutched a dish towel like it was a white flag, her eyes red and puffy. My father sat in a chair, shoulders hunched, hands trembling, boxes stacked everywhere. And then I saw them. Emma, my younger sister, laughing with that smirk I'd known all my life, and Greg, her husband, bare feet, beer in hand, stepping in front of my father like he owned the place. "This is my house. Get out," he barked. The cake dug into my palm and something quiet settled in me. Deep, surgical quiet. I'd spent years managing crises, smoothing chaos, and now chaos had arrived dressed as family entitlement. A little backstory might help. Emma is 2 years younger than me. In our house, she was the free spirit, the one who never seemed to worry about consequences. I was the fixer, the one who paid her rent when she lost a job, co-signed her leases, covered dental bills for her kids. Each payment, each favor, felt like a tiny patch over the ugly edges of our family. My parents contributed in smaller ways, quietly bleeding. Mom would pack groceries into Emma's trunk and call it clearing the pantry. Dad let Greg tinker with tools, letting mistakes slide. I had become a card everyone swiped without thought, a constant, invisible source of support. Now all that effort felt like a knife pointing back at me. I set the cake down. My parents looked at me with helpless confusion. Emma leaned against the counter, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Relax, Dad, we're just getting settled," she said. And that's when I realized the house, the very gift I'd crafted with every ounce of care, wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a battlefield. I took a deep breath, forcing my pulse to settle. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let anger dictate my actions. I reached into my bag for the folder I'd brought, a lifeboat disguised as a manila envelope. While Emma thought she owned the day, I remembered the trust I had set up. The house was in my parents' name, lifetime beneficiaries, exclusive right of occupancy. Legally, emotionally, it belonged to them. I studied the room. The little blue house smelled like salt and possibility. Outside, gulls cried over the bay. Inside, entitlement and chaos collided with history and love. I reminded myself of the stakes, my parents' comfort, their dignity. I wasn't here to punish Emma or Greg. I was here to reclaim the gift, to enforce a boundary they would respect or learn to. I could see it in my father's hands, trembling, tight on the armrests. The same man who once worked 3 jobs and still found time to attend my high school concerts. Now, he was being told to step aside in a house that had finally become theirs. I pulled the folder from my bag, the paper edges catching the morning light. Inside, the deed, trust instruments, prepaid HOA fees, and a record of every careful legal step I'd taken. It was a map of protection for my parents. I inhaled. "Everyone to the living room," I said, calm, measured, surgical, not loud, not aggressive, just precise. The children paused their cartoon. The dog froze mid-chew. Greg looked at me, incredulous. Emma smirked, but I could see the first crack forming, the tiniest flinch. I placed the first document on the coffee table, the deed. "This," I said, tapping it, "records that the property is owned by my parents, under their trust, as lifetime beneficiaries. You do not have a key. You do not have permission. Greg tried to laugh it off. Bro, try and stop me, he said. I slid the next page across. Trust instruments outlining my duty to maintain the house and remove anyone interfering with that duty. Emma's voice, saccharine and sharp. Megan, you can't be serious. We're just helping. I met her gaze. Helping, I said, doesn't mean taking over. This is a house for my parents. Not a business, not a rental, not your playground. The first hint of fear flashed in Emma's eyes. Greg shifted, uneasy, trying to mask his compliance with bravado. My parents exhaled softly, a small relief washing over their shoulders. I knew the battle wasn't over. But for now, the air in the little blue house had shifted. The ocean outside remained constant, gulls crying, windows singing. Inside, calm edged the chaos. And I was ready to see this through. The living room felt like a war zone disguised as a family home. Boxes were stacked, fast food wrappers littered the counter, and Emma lounged on the sofa as if she'd always belonged there. Greg leaned against the banister, arms crossed, grinning like he'd just won a lottery. My parents sat on either side, tense and silent, caught between gratitude and terror. I set my bag on the floor and unzipped it slowly, as though peeling back a curtain to reveal the truth. The documents were ready. Deeds, trust instruments, HOA rules, even screenshots of Emma's recent Airbnb listing. Everything precise, everything deliberate. Emma smirked. Megan, we're just excited. We're helping. This is about family. I let her words hang as if they were a mist that needed to settle before I spoke. Helping, I said, voice steady, doesn't mean taking over. This house was a gift for Mom and Dad. You do not have the right to treat it as your own. Greg chuckled nervously. Come on, Megan. It's just a few weekends. You're being dramatic. I took a step closer, careful not to raise my voice. I'm not asking, Greg. I'm telling. This house is for my parents, under their trust. Every document you see here proves that. You can leave voluntarily, or you can be removed. Your choice. My mother's hand found my father's. He looked up at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Megan, I don't want to get in the middle, he whispered. You're not in the middle, Dad, I said. You're at the center. This is about protecting you, that's all. Emma leaned forward, lowering her voice, trying a softer tactic. You've always been dramatic, Megan. Can't you just let us enjoy it? We want your parents to be happy. I shook my head slowly. You don't get to decide what happiness looks like for them. And trying to sneak control through entitlement, that isn't happiness. That's manipulation. Greg's grin faltered. He glanced at Emma, who was quiet for once. I could see them calculating, realizing the house wasn't up for negotiation. I laid down another document, a printout of Emma's Airbnb listing, with her photos, her captions, and her calendar of bookings. You've already tried to turn this house into a business, I said. It's against HOA rules. It's not a game. And legally, you cannot do this. Emma's voice rose in disbelief. Megan, you're so extreme. We're family. You're ruining everything. I leaned slightly forward, my hands on the table, calm and precise. I'm not ruining anything. I'm enforcing boundaries. Boundaries are not cruelty. They're what keeps a family from burning itself down. I won't negotiate with entitlement disguised as love. My father exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. My mother nodded, tears threatening again. Relief shimmered in their eyes, but fear still lingered. Fear of confrontation, of Emma's persistence. I pulled out the last piece, the HOA rules, laminated, clause highlighted for short-term rentals. I ran my finger down it. No short-term rentals. If this happens again, you will be violating not just the trust, but local law. This house is theirs. It will remain theirs. End of discussion. Greg's chest puffed up for a moment, a last attempt at intimidation. So what? You're going to make us leave? I looked at him evenly. I already have. You're being asked to pack today. Delete your listing. Refund everyone. Apologize to my parents. Leave a key on the counter. That's it. Emma's smirk cracked, replaced by something sharp and cold. You'll regret this when they need help and you're not around, she hissed. I felt a quiet fury rise. Not the rage that screams and destroys, but the calm, cold certainty of a surgeon holding a scalpel. I will be here for them, not as a bank, not as a safety net for your mistakes, but as a daughter, and I won't let you weaponize what I gave them. The children, oblivious to most of this, clutched their stuffed animals. The dog barked once, anxious. Greg backed off, muttering under his breath. Emma's fingers trembled slightly over the coffee table, her entitlement starting to collide with reality. I stepped back and let the document sit between us like a barrier, a line drawn in the sand. You have 1 hour to gather your things. If not, there are legal and practical measures in place. Consider this your only warning. Silence stretched. The ocean outside whispered through the open windows. Gull cries punctuated the tension. I could feel the shift, the quiet acknowledgement that I was serious, that the little blue house, my parents' gift, would not become a playground for manipulation. My mother whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you for doing this." I nodded. "They belong to you, Mom, not to anyone else." And in that small, tense pause, the first true breaths of relief entered the house. The calm before the storm of packing, shouting, and resistance, but relief nonetheless. I had taken the first step. Boundaries were being enforced. Love was being protected in its truest, quietest form. I glanced at the documents, at my parents, at Emma and Greg. The battle was far from over, but now I had the map, the tools, and the moral certainty to see it through. The tide of chaos was holding, for now, and outside the ocean continued to sing, indifferent yet soothing, a reminder that some things, like love and boundaries, needed time to settle. By the next morning, the house had the eerie stillness of a storm that had paused but not passed. Emma and Greg moved quietly, but the tension was electric, thick enough to taste. My parents sat at the kitchen table, trying to pretend everything was normal, yet every glance toward the living room betrayed their anxiety. I had already called Victor, the locksmith, and he was parked discreetly down the street, ready to enforce the legal boundary if Emma or Greg refused to leave. My parents didn't need to see the full arsenal. I wanted them to feel safe, not embroiled in my strategy. Emma tried charm first. "Megan, we just want to make things easier. You're being so rigid." Rigid. I let the word roll over me. A shield. "I'm precise, not rigid. You're trying to turn a gift into a transaction. That ends today." Greg laughed, a brittle sound that carried the false confidence of a man who thought rules were suggestions. "Come on, Megan, you can't be serious. They'll forgive us. Everyone forgives us." I stepped closer, sliding the laminated HOA rules toward them, the words highlighted in bold. "Forgiveness doesn't undo violations. You've already attempted to list this property online without consent. That's not a favor, it's theft. And now it stops." Emma's voice dropped, venom laced with frustration. "You think money makes you the parent? The giver? You think you're better than us?" I met her gaze without flinching. "I think you've confused generosity with permission. This house isn't yours to wield like a weapon. You've tried to make it one. I won't allow it." Greg's jaw clenched. He made a move, a subtle step forward. The gesture was small, but I sensed the threat. Calmly, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. The draft emails were ready. HOA complaint, county notification, cease and desist. One press would make their entitlement actionable. "You won't," he muttered. "I already have," I said. A slight smile touched my lips, but it wasn't triumph. It was certainty. I was no longer negotiating. I was enforcing. Emma glared at me, her smirk gone. For the first time, she looked unsure. "You'll regret this when Mom and Dad need help. You'll see what it's like to be cold when they're vulnerable." I shook my head. I am not abandoning them. I am protecting them, and myself. Love is not a permission slip for chaos. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are love. A long silence followed, broken only by the gulls outside and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I could feel the shift in the room. The balance of power had moved. Greg muttered something under his breath and sank into the sofa, defeated for the moment. Emma's fingers fidgeted over the edge of the coffee table. I laid down the final document, the trust instrument that allowed me to remove anyone interfering with the house's intended purpose. "One last chance," I said. "You leave voluntarily. You apologize to my parents. You delete your listing. You leave a key on the counter, 1 hour. After that, the locksmith arrives." My mother exhaled a soft, relieved sound. My father's hand found mine across the table. Their trust in me, built over decades of support and reliability, felt heavier than any document in my hands. Emma scoffed softly, then grabbed her purse. Greg followed reluctantly. The children clutched their stuffed animals, unsure if this was a game or the end of one. Slowly they gathered their things. The SUV engine started. Boxes were loaded with quiet grumbling. Before they left, Emma turned to me, her face pale with anger and a flicker of shame. "You could have just talked to me," she whispered. "I've been talking to you for 10 years," I replied, calm, precise. "This is the first time you listened," Greg muttered under his breath as they climbed into the SUV. My parents watched, exhaling in synchronized relief as the vehicle drove away. The tension in the house lifted slightly, but the echo of confrontation remained. I went room to room, straightening, picking up discarded items, restoring the house to the peace I had intended. Fast food wrappers, toy fragments, mismatched socks. These were small, insignificant pieces of chaos, but clearing them was symbolic. Restoration, order, care. In the guest room, I found a folded printout of Greg's business plan, margins scribbled with Emma's notes. "Megan won't say no if Mom cries." My chest tightened. The audacity, the expectation that I would always be the safety net. It had fueled years of quiet resentment. I placed the paper down. My mother apologized for the mess. I shrugged, smiled. "Crumbs," I said. "Nothing more." That night, after a long shift at the hospital, I returned to the house to check on them. The living room glowed softly under lamplight. My father read in his chair. My mother had a puzzle on the table, blanket over her lap. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore. I didn't enter. I stood on the porch and let the quiet speak. For the first time in decades, my parents could breathe freely, without fear of intrusion, without chaos forced upon them. Here's what I understood. Love isn't about covering someone's bad behavior. It's about protection. Love is a house with doors that lock. It's paperwork that holds. It's telling someone, "Rest. This is your sanctuary," while enforcing the boundaries necessary to make that sanctuary real. I stayed on the porch long after dark, the waves beneath me calm, the stars above indifferent yet steady. I knew Emma and Greg would return in spirit, with messages, arguments, and ultimatums. But the house, the gift, and my parents' peace, it was mine to defend. And I would. Boundaries had been drawn. The gift had survived. The love I had tried to give without strings had finally been protected. The days following Emma and Greg's departure were quiet, almost surreal. The little blue house seemed to breathe again, its walls shedding the tension that had thickened the air. The sound of the ocean was no longer a background to arguments. It became a lullaby, steady and calm, promising normalcy. Mom and Dad moved through the house slowly, savoring the small freedoms that had been denied them. Dad wandered to the porch each morning with his coffee, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and silver. Mom unpacked her favorite tea mugs and set them carefully on the counter, humming softly. For the first time in years, they weren't negotiating peace. They were living it. I stayed close, though not intrusively. Sometimes we'd sit together on the deck, sharing silence or small stories about the day. Mom told me about her first apartment, how she named the mouse Bernard because it only came out on Sundays. Dad laughed, his deep chuckle echoing through the rooms. Moments like these were small, almost mundane, yet they felt monumental after the storm we'd endured. Emma's interference didn't stop entirely. Messages appeared, requests for access, angry texts, passive-aggressive comments about fairness and family, but I no longer responded. The documents were in place, the locks were secure, and the boundaries were clear. I had learned that engagement was optional, but vigilance was necessary. The children, still oblivious to much of the legal and emotional drama, adjusted quietly. They played in the yard, laughed over pancakes, and began to understand that this was Grandma and Grandpa's home, not a playground for entitlement. One afternoon, my niece, 16 now, with the same big eyes and band tees as she always had, sent me a simple DM. "The house is pretty. Grandma looks happy there." I typed back, keeping it simple. "Come visit with Grandma's permission. No bookings, just pancakes." It was a tiny truce, but a meaningful one. A reminder that love and family weren't defined by control or greed. I spent the evenings reinforcing the house's security. The alarm system, cameras, labeled breaker switches, little signs marking spaces for Mom and Dad. Every action was measured, not to intimidate, but to protect. The house became more than a gift. It became a sanctuary, a symbol of respect and boundaries. Messages from Emma persisted, a payment request, a letter claiming she was the primary caregiver, memes mocking me. But each one was deflected by systems and structure. I didn't argue. I didn't justify, I enforced. My parents didn't have to lift a finger. One morning, Dad called me from the porch, voice relaxed. Megan, I slept through the night, for the first time in months. Mom sent me a photo later. Her feet resting on the deck rail, bright pink nail polish, ankles crossed, carefree like I had never seen her. The little blue house had become what I had intended, a gift that didn't cost my parents peace or dignity. The quiet brought reflection. I realized love isn't measured by sacrifice alone. It's measured by protection, by the courage to enforce boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. Love doesn't demand you be everything for everyone. It allows people to breathe, to rest, to reclaim what was theirs all along. Emma and Greg were no longer physically present, but the echoes of their entitlement lingered in memories, messages, and what-if scenarios. I let them exist without letting them define the house or my family's peace. I had given my parents a home, and I had guarded it fiercely. The ocean outside continued to sing through the windows. The walls absorbed laughter and quiet evenings. Mom and Dad finally had their sanctuary, and I understood, fully and deeply, that boundaries had not been cruel. They had been necessary. Love is a house with doors that lock. Love is paperwork that holds. Love is knowing when to step in and when to step back. And love, I realized, is most powerful when it protects the ones who gave everything for you without ever asking for anything in return. The little blue house was theirs, and for the first time in decades, it truly felt like home. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the little blue house settled into something steady, comforting. The ocean whispered outside, constant and reliable, a reminder that life moved on no matter the storms we endured. I spent my mornings in quiet observation, coffee in hand, notebook open, watching my parents laugh over breakfast or kneel with their grandchildren in the yard. Each moment felt deliberate, precious, like the fragile pages of a diary we couldn't afford to rip. Emma and Greg's shadow had faded, but not disappeared entirely. Social media posts, veiled comments, and sporadic messages reminded me that not everyone could respect boundaries. But I had learned the difference between vigilance and obsession. Their influence stopped at the threshold of the house. Beyond that line, only love, peace, and respect lived. I reflected on the years I had spent being the mediator, the fixer, the one who smoothed edges and paid debts that weren't mine. I realize now that love is not defined by sacrifice alone. It is defined by the courage to act when necessary, the wisdom to protect without overextending, and the resolve to enforce boundaries that safeguard those we care for. One afternoon, my niece came by, slipping off her shoes and heading straight to the deck. She glanced at me, shyly, then at my mother and father, who were setting up a small tea tray. "Grandma looks happy," she said, her voice soft. "Yes," I replied, smiling, "and this is her house. Safe, just for her." She grinned, the kind of grin that didn't need explanation. I understood then that legacy isn't always about material gifts. Sometimes it's about creating spaces where people can breathe, make mistakes, and still feel secure. I wandered through the house later, room by room. Every corner told a story. The kitchen, where Mom had discovered her favorite tea mug. The living room where Dad laughed freely. The guest room where chaos had once erupted. Each space now held peace, order, and the unspoken promise that love could be fierce and gentle at the same time. I thought about Emma and Greg, about the lessons embedded in confrontation. Some people will test limits. Some will mistake generosity for weakness. But boundaries, I had learned, are the truest form of respect. Respect for yourself and for the ones you love. That evening, alone on the porch, I watched the sunset spill across the horizon, painting the water in shades of fire and gold. The house, quiet and resilient, held its light. The locks clicked softly behind me, a gentle affirmation that protection and love could coexist. I knew challenges would come again, relatives, misunderstandings, perhaps even my own doubts, but the foundation had been laid. I had acted with clarity, courage, and unwavering purpose. The gift I gave my parents had survived, not because it was purchased, but because it was guarded with care, intention, and heart. Love, I realized, is not giving everything until nothing is left. Love is knowing when to step in and when to step back. Love is creating a sanctuary that cannot be taken, manipulated, or abused. The little blue house stood against the wind and the tides, steadfast. My parents breathed easy, Laughter returned to the rooms, and somewhere in the quiet, I allowed myself to believe that love had been preserved, not by compromise, not by submission, but by courage, precision, and unwavering devotion. I closed my notebook, inhaled the salty air, and smiled. The ocean sang, the windows caught the last light of day, and I felt the kind of satisfaction that comes not from victory over others, but from having protected what truly matters. This was the legacy I would leave my parents, and perhaps one day, my own children. A house that is home, a love that is fierce yet kind, a boundary that keeps the light on without burning the neighborhood down. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly right.